I will say it is harder now than it was a year ago, just because part of these transformational efforts and part of that customization, it's a tax on the workforce. And right now that workforce has been reduced significantly.
Welcome to the Optimize podcast, brought to you by VisibleThread. The Optimize podcast is your go-to source for expert insights on BD, capture, proposal management, and government contracting. Each series is hosted by an expert in the field, bringing their unique experience and strategies to every episode. We're excited to kick off Series 4 with our new host, Chris Hamm. Chris is the CEO of Fin Acquisitions and former senior executive at GSA's Assisted Acquisition Services, where he oversaw $75 billion in contracts. Now he's bringing that insight to the podcast, exploring the strategies and future of federal contracting. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on wherever you are listening. Now let's join Chris on this episode.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Optimize podcast by VisibleThread. I'm your host, Chris Hamm. Today, I am delighted to introduce a former colleague and good friend of mine, Robert Bob Niewood. Tons of acquisition experience and systems, and this one's probably going to be a little bit different. We're going to have lots of dialogue about like the nature of systems, financial management, like things that are more inside how it works in government. So stay tuned for that. And with that, let me first pepper Bob with an unexpected question. You notice I'm wearing my Eagle shirt today. This is our establishing our Philly bona fides. You got to give me a favorite Philly, a favorite Eagle, and a favorite Sixer.
All right, I'll go backwards. I very much enjoyed Allen Iverson when he made his run during the Sixers campaign. Favorite Philly, I am partial. Again, it's a childhood thing, but I'm partial to Michael Jack Schmidt. That was an excellent opportunity to watch him growing up. Favorite Eagle, right now flying high with Jalen Hurts and the team. That's an excellent squad they have right now. So,
there were no wrong answers there. But you got 2 out of 3. The correct childhood answer would have been Randall Cunningham.
Yeah.
But where I was going with this was like a fun little anecdote. So, any of us, when you're young playing sports, you might be, the best, basketball player, baseball player in your local town, and then you go to an all-star game. And at the all-star game, you see somebody who's like, oh wait, like they might have more talent. They might hustle more. Like for me, that was Lenny Dykstra. And there's a guy, I don't know where he is. I don't know, what's happened in his life, but for me, that was a guy named Jason Dehart. He was like the hustle player who I always wanted to be. And here's your backhanded compliment. You were that at GSA for me. That was oh wait, there's somebody who like outworks me. There's somebody who outsystems me. There's something like, oh, so like that's my introduction to you as like this is the guy who knows how everything works.
Well, that's very high praise. Thank you very much for that.
All right, so with the hype machine now, give me a quick rundown. Give me where you started, and then we'll talk about some of the systems implications after that.
Sure. So Philadelphia native, did not plan on coming into government. My college trajectory was in the marketing space. I thought I'd probably end up in pharmaceuticals, which is big in our area. But then I happened upon the federal intern program. My aunt was a former contracting officer down at for the Navy. She connected me to the GSA regional office. I joined that intern program and I loved it. I fell in love with government contracting. It's an awesome field that does really meaningful work. I committed to basically a 2-tiered career trajectory. I wanted to learn everything about contracting. And then by extension, I got really interested in the systems that those contracts were managed in. So on the contracting path, I started over 22 years ago, 2003. I basically worn every hat in that contracting space. I've been a core contracting officers rep. I've been a contract specialist. I've had my warrant. I brief little hiatus from GSA to DHS to get that. I came back to GSA. I moved from a regional office to the central office. worked in the program management office for AAS, where I spent most of my career. That's the Office of Assisted Acquisitions. Became the director of acquisitions briefly for that, and then really briefly on the tail end, I was actually the HCA for the multiple award schedules program for 5 months, right at the tail end of my federal career there. And I've even been sort of a client. I've been a user of a lot of these contracts. So very familiar with sort of the contracting side and really interested in how that process unfolds and how it creates value for the taxpayer and for the warfighter. It's really fascinating to see, a contracting officer execute that warrant. Stock prices change, employment offers go out, small businesses become large, missions get fulfilled. It's really fascinating. And as I'm observing that, I'm watching all of these contracting functions being executed, a bunch of legacy systems. And there was just a lot of opportunities to try to improve those systems. So I got really interested in systems. Something happened right at the beginning of my intern program where they were fielding an application, threw me right into it as part of a trainer liaison for the region. I got hooked. I got pretty well connected in the CIO's office. I started writing requirements, became a product owner. I was the system owner for the Assist application, which is AAS's end-to-end business system. Became the director of systems for AAS. Eventually moved into the commissioner's office in FAS, the Federal Acquisition Service. Took over some of the enterprise governance functions, the investment board that looked at all their systems investments, and then started building out a business architecture for FAS. That was leading all the way up to the last 22 years, up until the current administration, where the DRP offer came out, and I said, hey, this might be my opportunity to try the one role in contracting I haven't had, which is to be a contractor. So now that's where I am at. I'm started an LLC like many, hoping to provide some consulting services back to all of our industry partners and potentially the federal government about how to improve our procurement ecosystem.
All right, so we started around the same time. I got a little more gray up here than you, so maybe a couple of years off. And so it sounds like you started with the same sort of discovery that I did. Like, you're in a job, and then somebody tells you, we're going to go buy something. We're going to go buy some microphones. We're going to buy some chairs, and you've got to figure it out. So, like, walk me through, like, first year or two, like how the money flows. Like, mine was, we use like a Lotus system, and then there was like paper folders. Like, what's your discovery, and like, how does like this actually work?
Yeah, so when I came in there, I was being sort of cross-trained as a project manager. So I had that sort of client. We had external clients, other agencies we were supporting with. And again, it was Lotus Notes based for our email, very Microsoft Word centric, doing a lot of things, writing Microsoft Word. We had those large file cabinets. I remember, spending a lot of time tabbing contract files. And at that time, we were using an application in the regions called ITSS, the IT Solution Shop. So that was where we did, some of the data entry, but a lot of it was still done offline. Unbeknownst to me, bigger things were happening at GSA, and they had acquired an enterprise resource planning system where they wanted to move all of this capability into a commercial off-the-shelf SAP-based solution. And fortunate for me, I was in the Mid-Atlantic region in the Philadelphia office. It was one of the guinea pigs. It was one of the pilots there. So I was attending the training. I kind of had a little bit of an aptitude for the data side. I guess they saw, hey, this is a young guy. He has, more technology than some of the older folks. And I had an opportunity to participate really hands-on in it. It didn't go well. So during that experience, a lot of folks were frustrated inside the regional office, and there was just a lot of opportunities to get inserted into that process, make connections with the OCIO and folks. The one moment where I realized, like, hey, this is really fascinating work being in the government space as a 1 year out of college. We're doing a demo, and I'm a GS7, and the room is filled with SESs and GS15s and vice presidents from these Fortune 500 companies. And I'm just walking them through. The administrators there, the commissioners are there, and I'm walking them through there. And I just, took a breath and said, wow, there are tremendous opportunities inside federal government to do really important work pretty early. So I'm a big advocate of folks pursuing careers in federal government and, promoting that internship program. I think it's a great pipeline for developing talent, but there's so much need for these improvements. And there's such a great opportunity. And I was just very fortunate to be at the right place at the right time to capitalize on that.
All right. So the one of the best expressions out there is history doesn't always repeat itself, but it rhymes. You're talking about a commercial software application being deployed inside of an acquisition environment that requires some modification, some customization in order to make it work. When you were doing that, I was on the receiving end of that training, and I remember raising my hand saying, "This will not work. This will not work. This will not work." Um, did it work?
No, so two other things were moving right around that same period as well, which was uh they revisited all the appropriation rules in terms of how our revolving fund operated. So back at that time, there was the IT solutions or the IT fund, which basically converted all appropriations to sort of a no-year money. They were put into this revolving fund. Um, Turns out that's not how they wanted it to be managed, and they created the acquisition services fund. So that money management part, as much as these contracting offices or any federal agency attempts to adopt and exploit commercial practices, the money is not the way money is managed is not commercial, is not related in any regard to how the commercial organizations operate. So there's a lot of customization that's going to have to be put in that space. Now, an office like assisted acquisition, we were managing other people's money. We had billions of DoD and civilian agency funds that required a degree of transparency, a degree of accountability, and traceability that isn't common in most offices, commercial offices that are doing that kind of procurement. Additionally, we are dependent on our financial management systems, and those financial management systems have been customized very heavily to support these the uniqueness of the federal appropriation cycle, where you have 1-year monies and no-year monies and multi-year monies and all controls around periods of availability for expenditure versus periods of availability for obligation, all sorts of really complex business logic that has to be built into those that's not commercial. But then we get these commercial solutions, and then they expect to write into and integrate with and connect with it, but they're just not collecting the right data to feed some of these government-specific requirements. And historically, over the 22 years experience, we've still struggled with that. The uniqueness of how the federal government manages money undercuts a lot of what happens in the contract space. So I like to say sort of the financial tail wags the dog. And I learned that very early, during that intern program, because that was where our COTS solution, it was this enterprise resource planning, but we didn't implement the financial module because our financial management was so different. So having an ERP that wasn't enterprise, and then we had to write back to our financial management system, became a real blocker. So when we had an opportunity to do it ourselves, again, we went out and looked at the commercial solutions. And in each case, we're like, hey, we're going to have to do massive surgery on this to get it to talk back to our financial management systems to make sure that we are compliant with all the appropriation requirements. So again, that was an opportunity. And again, right around that same time, the interagency agreement process was being birthed by some of the policy that was out there about having general terms and conditions, and then the obligating document and how we had to manage those things. So it was a really interesting time. And again, it rhymes because there's been 3 more instances of those sort of commercial applications during my career, and then contemplation of another right now at the beginning of my career as a contractor. So I do think there's a lot of opportunity to apply the lessons learned to those opportunity of those previous implementations. We just got to make sure that we apply them and we don't repeat it for a 4th time in 25 years.
All right, so technology has changed a tad, 2025 versus, when this was hot for us in the 2000s and 2010s. But you now have a choice, right? You could use a commercial application that is custom and proprietary. You could do something that's in between, like they're platform companies,
Yeah.
they're more, you maneuver them yourselves, but you're interacting with a company that provides something. I know, like GSA had a version of
Yeah.
Salesforce that did that, or there was a application wizard, so a low codey kind of thing that you can do.
Yeah.
Or you can develop your own thing. Like you can just have agile software development and wide open. Like in the world of FAS, is the answer one of those three? Is it all three? Like what do you think like the design should be to work with the money and the contracting in such a complicated environment?
Yeah, so my experience has led it sort of a bias towards that custom build. And GSA is a unique animal. So most people, when they think of contracting or procurement, they think of it as sort of the back office kind of cost center. That's not the case with GSA. GSA contracting is its mission. It's a profit center. So there's a ton of things that the GSA organization, Federal Acquisition Service, needed that just wasn't part of those commercial products or even some of those low code platforms. So a lot of that required to be custom built. Like we had clients, we had buyers, we had bills, we had accruals, we had the role-based access control paradigm was different because we had a three-party process. We actually had customers that wanted to access and interface with the systems, the acquisition workforce executing it, and then we had the contractor community building it out. Now, again, I don't want to be absolutist. I do think the ecosystem can support all types, and we can bring in some of those commercial off-the-shelf applications to plug in to specific business domains. I know things like email or even just like the Amazon Web Services, like that cloud environment, those are commercial tools that make sense for the government to exploit. There's also commercial tools that make sense to exploit for very specific capabilities. That could be digital signatures, data visualization. There are tools that fill those needs really well. But if you're talking about automating the mission processes, that core mission capability, historically the experience has been a custom built solution offers GSA, offers the government a flexibility that's not available in the COTS applications, and it's even not really available in the low code solutions. Those low code platforms can provide an intermediate relief, but if you really want to drive the value creation and have a responsive solution that can tailor to that changing acquisition environment, when a new innovative idea comes in, you're not bound by some of those limitations that you might have in a low code platform or a COTS product. Additionally, it's not greenfield. We're not coming into this and saying, hey, we can just plant this new application in there. It's got to interface with the legacy environment. There's a ton of things already happening, and having that degree of flexibility is critical to make sure that we can build those interfaces in a way that make the most sense for the workforce. So again, if it's pure mission item, mission fulfillment processes, I do have a bias towards that custom build. And also custom building things is becoming a lot easier now too. I mean, there's opportunities for us to actually do some of that coding, whether that's leveraging AI or, the design mockups and all that stuff. But the barrier to a custom built solution is dropping. So I believe that's a space where they should provide. Now, notwithstanding, I know there's an executive order that says, we need to look at those commercial solutions and have a bias towards those commercial solutions. But it's very business specific. But for the business of government contracting, specifically at the General Services Administration, where it was their mission, their value creating activity, I would still put those core capabilities. I'd maximize the flexibility and control we have over those core capabilities, and that would be my recommendation to lead towards the custom built solutions.
Let me challenge you a bit on that one, because I knew that was going to be your answer, and that was the right answer in 2024.
Yeah,
you cut the workforce 20 or 30%. You have a bias for commercial applications. All of a sudden, can GSA be its own integrator and build its own applications in the environment today? Could you greenfield do something for this new OCAS office and deploy using what you're describing?
So OCAS is an example, and you're still going to be constrained by the financial systems. So that's both going to be the GSA financial management systems, their Pegasus application, as well as Treasury's G-invoicing application. Those things are facts and evidence that you can't really go greenfield and pretend that those two things don't exist, because that is the path by which the money is going to change hands from agency A to agency B. So you're going to have to accept that as a given, and you are going to have to tie into those. Now, if you want to tie into those with a COTS product, you probably have a higher level of effort. If you want to tie into those with a low code solution, you have a medium level of effort. Building those interfaces in a custom space is probably the easiest. I will say it is harder now than it was a year ago, just because part of these transformational efforts and part of that customization, it's a tax on the workforce, and right now that workforce has been reduced significantly. So whether it's the impacts of the early retirements and the deferred resignations and the return to office and some of the uncertainty around being riffed and then not riffed and all of that stuff, there is there's decreased capacity in the federal workforce to absorb these kinds of transformational changes. But I still think there are pockets of subject matter expertise, some really strong product owners inside GSA, really strong technical folks inside GSA IT, that if they were going to go down that path, it probably makes sense to continue down that customized solution. Having accepted that, though, I think they do need to be aware of what their limitations are, what capacity they can actually commit to. It takes a village. Doing any of these large-scale transformational processes, the technology is important, and whether it's COTS or low code or custom built, that's all fine. But it's about managing the people and re-engineering those business processes, and that's where you're going to end up having a lot of time commitment, and that's going to be probably the greatest constraint on some of the aspirations that folks have, more so than the technology, regardless of which one of those options they choose.
All right, so we're about 25 minutes in, and I want to highlight something that's of interest to me. At no point in any of these conversations have we said the word contract writing.
Yep.
Every aspect of the systems that we're talking about it's the glue, it's the financial flow, it's the audits, it's the process, and it's not the interface, and it's not clauses. So is that the main issue, that people think that the systems need to be contract writing systems, and really they need to be broader than that? They need to be requirements. They need to have user registration. Is it that the understanding of what the term acquisition system is just misguided?
I do think that is part of the challenge. So I've faced this very frequently in the development of the Assist application. So one of the things that we were trying to accomplish is it's a diverse user community that's going to be touching this. We have program managers and project managers from the various agencies that are the customers. We have industry partners, contractors that will be submitting proposals and bids and invoices and countersigning awards and submitting deliverables. But the acquisition workforce is broader than the 1102 community that's going to sign, create the contract, do the contract formation processes. There are those contract specialists, there are those contracting representatives, there are invoice specialists, there are closeout specialists, there are funds management specialists, there are program managers, there are intermediate levels of middle management and senior management that need to view this. So contract writing is a component of a broader business system, and making those trade-offs, having to make a determination, hey, we have limited capacity, we have an available development team to work for 2 quarters on some new capacity. Do we work in something in the contracting space like clauses, or do we work in something in the financial management space like accruals, or do we work in something in the post-award administration space like deliverables? Those items need to be trade off, and then you have all your technical enablers, moving to the cloud, moving to open source, security controls. So it's a degree of trade-offs. Now, the counter argument would be like, hey, we can just, create a network where we have, one clause management system, one sales reporting system, one invoice system, one billing system, and then you build an ecosystem of a whole bunch of one-off applications that are, are targeted at a specific capability. Well, we have some of that. We've had a historical experience with some of that. And there is a cost of trying to keep all of these things together and maintaining the currency and the accuracy and the latency of the data so that they're all moving in sequence. So one of the approaches that we had taken was like, hey, we're going to have to define it not purely as a contract writing system that is looking at, the formation of contracts and, the uniform contract format and the clauses, and it'll be very pretty, but a much larger context that will include all of the stakeholders in federal procurement. So it's more of a generalist approach, and it does require trade-offs, which means each user community is going to have to make sacrifices and not get exactly what they want. And the 1102 community is one of them. They're going to desire more exclusive contract writing capabilities, and they can get them. They're on offer. That's where, folks come in with, the COTS products that, offer these clauses right out of the box. And it's great for that function, but then when they pull the aperture back and try to take a look at the big picture, all right, well, we got all of our clauses, but we can't record the obligation. So we got to, spend a couple of months trying to build and rebuild these new interfaces. All right, well, now we can record the obligation, but we can't pay the invoice. All right, well, now we got to go and figure out. So having that broader view of it as a business system I do think is a critical component in terms of like framing this conversation and make sure they're including the full scope of requirements. It also puts more emphasis on having a knowledge of the business. So I've seen a number of instances where individual contracting offices, they will write out their business processes, and you'll see the chevrons that go from acquisition, market research and acquisition planning to pre-solicitation to solicitation evaluation to award, and then a big chevron for administration, and then a little one at the end for closeout. And they all think they have pretty much the same requirements. But when you start talking to them individually, it's the operating environment that they're working in, the business model that they are approaching that creates a ton of variability between those things. So you might have 3 offices all following, the procedures under FAR Part 15, contracting by negotiation. Well, if one office is exclusively doing that, they are only forming contracts, 100% of their portfolio is under contracting by negotiation, they're going to take a different approach to automation than another office where contracting by negotiation is a small percentage. They might do a little bit of FAR Part 15, a lot in 12 and 13, a whole bunch in Part 8, and a whole bunch in, task ordering under 16505. Well, they're going to have to build a slightly different solution. If the business is kind of like the GWAC and MAC model, government-wide acquisition contracts, or the multi-agency contracts, where they might have 1,000 contracts, but they're all going to be awarded on the same day, you're going to want to automate and design processes that are different to handle that sort of peak load versus 1,000 contracts that are going to be awarded, on a fairly consistent basis over the course of the year, or even that has seasonal spikes with sort of like a fourth quarter, half of the business happens in the fourth quarter to obligate the money. So having that business sense tells you where to like turn the levers on some of those contracting capabilities, as well as the other financial and project management and post-award administration capabilities. So I'm a big fan of framing it inside its business context first, and then having contract writing or that pure contract formation capability as a subset or a part of that broader scope. But the broader scope, that holistic approach, is essential, I think, to achieving some of the success long-term and creating that stability.
All right. So anybody who wants to come in and put in one system for an acquisition for any single agency, let alone GSA, listen to the last 10 minutes and figure out why it probably won't work and why you would spend maybe, $90 million and not have an end result. That's a pretty good summary of why it's hard.
Yeah.
So you'd mentioned, like the world of GWACs and MACs. All right. So in a recent executive order in a lot of, trade press, there's been conversations about the potential for doing consolidated procurement at GSA. There's the idea of OCAS, which is centralized procurement, but then there's also contract vehicles that could potentially be relocated from NIH or from NASA over into GSA. So we just talked about for a long time about like how it's hard, to consider all of the unique needs of an acquisition system. Just your experience. Somebody wants to take something with dozens or hundreds of awardees and an existing portfolio, and they want to move it from one agency to another. What would it take? How long would it take?
So part of the challenge is GSA is the receiving agency of whether it's NIH's vehicles or NASA's vehicles. Is GSA still has a challenge managing its portfolios of GWACs and MACs, and there's still variability between how a GWAC is managed in terms of the systems that it touches and the data model that's used, versus how some of the MACs are managed. So there's still an opportunity inside GSA to find a solution that is broad enough to support the entire scope of all the diverse GWACs as well as all of the diverse MACs that they have. So it's not like they can just pick up some of these NIH or NASA applications and put them into a GSA system, because there are multiple GSA systems. The NIH work is probably a lower level of effort because there is some commonality there where both NIH and GSA have been leveraging a Symphony platform for its source selection of the vehicle itself, as well as some of the fair opportunity management once the vehicles are awarded. NASA will be a harder lift. But even that commonality that exists on the Symphony part of it, Symphony is only one dimension of it. They're still going to have to get all that contract data into the Prism application, COM, that GSA uses right now. That's where they've put their recently awarded GWACs. They're going to still have to tie it into the various systems that touch it in terms of its, electronic contract file, in terms of its sales reporting portals. They're going to have to make that contract information discoverable. Once it's in Prism, it can translate to their enterprise data warehouse and then try to make that available on things like GSA Advantage or buy.gsa.gov so that those things are discoverable. One common statement, though, is folks don't like other, incoming work from other agencies. They want to have that opportunity to review it. So I hope when this trigger gets pulled and these vehicles move, they don't bring the older vehicles. It seems like the plan is to wait till the new NIH CIO contracts get awarded, to wait until the NASA contract gets awarded, and then start fresh with the new. If they try to migrate the old, it'll never get done. But if they try to start with the new, that's still a significant level of effort that's, multiple years in the making to actually pull that off. So they might be able to rebadge people. They might be able to say it's there, but if they really want to keep these things live, they're also going to have to move these systems that those legacy, that those vehicles are on, and then methodologically and strategically over a multi-year, call it 5-year strategy, they're going to have to try to sunset those systems while they rationalize some of the data models and come up with a enterprise solution that is scalable enough to support Alliant 3 and NASA and OASIS Plus. So that part is still a big challenge that GSA hasn't solved for itself, let alone being able to ingest very quickly some of these other ones. So I anticipate if they move the vehicle, they're also going to move the systems.
I've been pretty public pretty early about the whether or not it's a good idea. Doesn't matter. People who are elected make decisions on where stuff should be, but the mechanics of it, nothing fast. Like the not just even moving the old vehicles, but I have been on the receiving end of taking other people's awarded contracts and money and just trying to understand the formats in, and then be able to get somebody who has some expertise. Like, if you were to move the people who currently manage it, they know where everything is. But I'm going to move you over to the worst version of that, the new idea for centralized procurement for a bunch of small agencies that are being merged collectively into GSA. So what is your initial take on trying to stand up an office that does common goods and services? You're doing ordinary stuff, chairs and laptops and whatever else for 3 or 4 small agencies, but you didn't bring the people over with it in the new OCAS office.
I don't like it as a strategy. Taking something that's simple but distributed. So these common goods and services are relatively simple acquisitions, but yes, they are distributed across multiple agencies, and making them more complex. So again, this gets back to not having that holistic view. If you're only concerned about optimizing the contract formation, then hey, let's have one office form all those contracts. But we can't centralize the financial management. You're going to require each of those agencies that gave up that work, now, in addition to managing a contract, they're going to have to manage an interagency agreement. So there's a whole new workflow that's going to be created for each one of these things as an agency gives it over to GSA. They're no longer managing a contract, but they are managing an interagency agreement. And there aren't a lot of simplified there are simplified acquisition procedures. There are not a lot of simplified financial management procedures. So whether it's $100 million or $100, they got to jump through pretty much the same hoops to get the money from one agency to another agency. And they're not going to be able to centralize the contract administration. So somebody still needs to be at the requiring agency to accept the goods and services, to provide that, receipt of a good or provide some technical direction, and to surveil that government's actually getting what it pays for, that the right goods are showing up where they need to be on time, and the right services are being executed and compliant with all the terms of the contract. So OCAS is centralizing only one dimension, which is the contract formation part, having the CO sign the award and execute the mods. But they've created a much more complex financial management picture, and they still have that distributed contract administration picture. So actually getting that to really create traction is not a easy item. And I know GSA's AAS organization has looked at these common goods and services historically. Now, again, there's a degree of optionality. Both parties kind of have to agree that it makes sense for that relationship to operate. Part of the reason I think OCAS has some appeal right now is that it's so cheap. Like they will not recover their cost. It's expensive to do all of that extra work of managing those interagencies and the funds and to build out the systems and the support for all of those things. And I believe it's just going to continue to suck resources out of the acquisition services fund because we can't price these in a way that will recover it. And that's just, again, a lesson learned from AAS trying to price some of its smaller dollar, common goods and services, that product base. So it's more akin to some of the requisition channels that take place than some of the pure AAS model. The upside is they've been able to reuse some of AAS's tools, personnel, so they have some familiarity with that. But most of the contracting folks have been repurposed, again, not from the agencies where the work is coming, but from the public building service. So you have this two sort of mismatched items. You have new people coming in trying to learn a new environment, and you have new requirements coming in where folks are trying to learn this sort of ecosystem. I would have much rather seen a targeted approach at those high dollar value strategic ones where you can clearly add a ton of value. And AAS already has the structure for that, so press more forward in that space. I believe there was an optimism that things like artificial intelligence would make this stuff super easy, but it doesn't obviate all of the complex financial appropriation management stuff that's happening. So until Congress says, all right, well, we're going to stop giving that money to those agencies and give it directly to GSA, that would be the only way that I think this makes economic sense for the organization. But I think it's a false economy. They might save a little bit on the contract formation, but they're going to pay so much more on the funds management and the contract administration.
Yep, that's the metaphor I was looking for there. So, you take all of these agencies together. So it's SBA, HUD, education, I don't know, maybe some other, maybe some parts of OMB, whatever. Like collectively, they all decide that they're going to use Gmail for email, and they're all going to use Microsoft Office licenses, and they use this OneGov stuff to get the discount. It's like everyone's going out to a restaurant and everyone's trying to order. But when you order, you're like, well, my Microsoft needs to have this different thing, and my Google needs to have this different thing, and I got to pay with my own credit card. And like in order for that, then I need to do it as a purchase order. And so like that's when the vendor side is like, wait a minute, you don't get the enterprise deal. Like the enterprise deal is a one buy, not like a 5-person buying. Like that's the inherent problem.
Yeah. And the timing and those little one-off specifications matter. I mean, if I need a good delivered on a certain date, I might not have my requirements when you go issue that main thing. So I'm still going to have to, that main collective one. Again, for some of those advantages, it seems like rather than centralize the procurement, they just needed to reduce the barriers to using some of our existing, IDVs, those indefinite delivery vehicles, whether that's the schedules, the GWACs, or the MACs. So they're already working in that space with some of the OneGov initiatives, trying to get those prices to be more, priced at the enterprise level, even if the execution is taking place, agency by agency. Now I know there are some really smart people at the head of OCAS and working to make that a reality, and they are trying to come up with innovative solutions to actually reduce some of that complexity in the financial space and some of that complexity in the the contract administration space. But I don't think they're very easy hurdles for folks to overcome, and they will require a ton of upfront investment. So that's going to be a challenge when there are many other opportunities. And again, the workforce is relatively constrained because they just don't have a lot of excess capacity to do these multiple large scale transformations concurrently.
All right. So spent a lot of time saying things are really hard, they're really complicated, and they may not work at the schedule that everyone's talked about. So let's turn it into like something a little bit positive. Like what is going to work in the short term? Like what do you know? Like is the the procurement ecosystem going to work? Is AI going to work? Like what's something that's actually in in 2026 you think is going to start making a difference?
I like the idea of where they're headed with the procurement ecosystem. I do think it probably needs to have a more defined scope. I will say, I think GSA has made some significant improvements both prior to and the beginning of this administration as it relates to a pending reorganization, where they've done they've done a lot of good work in terms of trying to get the decision-making processes more aligned inside the organization. So what they are ready to make some of these, it's a faster process, and they can line up the budgets and the decision-making and all of that stuff in a more appropriate space. I do think the schedules will continue to grow and continue to need modernization and integration of their efforts, and I think that's something that can be done and will be done over the next 4 years or next 5 years, and I think that's a really valuable, that will create a lot of valuable for a lot of users. There is some momentum to actually normalizing some of those tools that are being used by the multiple award schedules program and the GWACs and MACs. So I think there will be incremental delivery of some of this, but again, it's not like flip a switch and all of a sudden all the GWAC schedules MACs from all across the government are now inside one application with a very easy use. AI is an interesting one. I view AI right now much like dashboards and robotic process automation were in prior years, where there's this flurry of activity right now where everybody's just trying to capitalize on the tool. I believe it's going to create sort of that cottage industry where there's a whole bunch of different one-off AI implementations that don't necessarily scale to the agency. So there'll be a little bit of a Wild West, but I think that's a great sort of explore opportunity to find out where those AI implementations do create traction. But actually finding the ones that can scale and be used over and over again at the broader part, I think that's going to be a very interesting space to watch. I don't know if that's trying to figure out. I like the idea of consolidating on contracts. I do think getting those into one space under one system will be a boon both to industry and to the acquisition workforce by normalizing and streamlining business processes. And I hope it creates a lower barrier to entry for, new entrants, non-traditional folks coming into the space. The other space that's really interesting right now, in addition to AI, is just BPAs. With the FAR overhaul, one thing that I would speculate is there's going to be a lot more blanket purchase agreements. As there's pressure to use the best-in-class vehicles, as some of the restrictions on single award BPAs have been walked back, and as blanket purchase agreements are now available under 16505 for ordering under GWACs and MACs and other IDIQs, that's going to be a very interesting space to watch, because I think there's going to be a ton of innovative solutions that emerge in that space, but they're going to emerge so much faster than the data models and the systems can support, which is currently a problem that we can see already. BPAs under schedule, we don't have a great data set, and there's a lot of data integrity issues in that space in terms of whether things are reported under the schedule or reported under the BPA under the schedule, but it creates this 3-tiered parent, child, grandchild approach, where the BPA call to the BPA to the IDIQ. It's just a different data model that some of our legacy systems haven't built, and that's going to require a fair amount of refactoring. So I do anticipate in the short term, the procurement ecosystem will continue to evolve, but the legacy systems are going to still need care and feeding because the world hasn't stopped. There are new GWACs and and expansion of the MACs that are happening today, and they will need those. So I do think there's opportunities for industry and GSA to continue to collaborate to maintain and expand the current ecosystem, while in parallel we end up building out a broader, more transformational end-to-end procurement ecosystem, and really just find those, I don't want to call them low-hanging fruit because everything has a degree of challenge with it, but find those opportunities where we can leverage intelligent automation, whether it's with large language models or not. There's a lot that still can be automated in the acquisition workflow, and we just need to pick our targets strategically and try to execute.
Yep. Well, there you have it. I told you at the very beginning that Bob knew how everything worked, how all the systems were going to need to be modernized. And I believe that he has demonstrated his case that this is a very, very large, complicated system environment. And if you would like to know more, you can find Bob on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Well, Chris, it's been a pleasure, and I look forward to the opportunity of actually experiencing this from the other side as a contractor and working with other industry partners to solve this complex set of problems.
Well, I encourage you to register in SAM then and find out what it's really like to be a contractor, because that will be an eye-opening experience.
Yeah.
And that wraps up this episode of the Optimize podcast. A big shout out to our amazing host, Chris Hamm, and our guest, Bob Niewood. Optimize is brought to you by VisibleThread, the RFP software for analyzing solicitations and contracts, and for creating and editing proposals. VisibleThread is used by 11 of the top 15 US government contractors. For more information, visit VisibleThread.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you are listening. Stay tuned for more insightful discussions on the Optimize podcast.